Okay, so I will start by introducing myself. My name is Samson Goddy. I'm a co-founder for the Open Source Community Africa. I'm very excited about this panel because it's a very important conversation that at some point that we should be having, and really glad that I'm having this opportunity to be a co-host for the panel section alongside Marlene. Hello, Marlene. We
Hi,
can hear
Marlene.
you.
You're on mute.
She froze. No, she's not on mute. She froze.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so while she's trying to figure out my audio, so Aniedi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Why me? Don't
I'm looking at my screen.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Aniedi. I currently work as developer relations program manager at Google, covering a lot of our community growth in Africa. But I think I have been involved and inspired by open source for about 15 years. And that sort of characterizes my journey. And I think looking back and looking forward, I'm very excited about the future of open source in Africa.
Awesome. The future of open source. That's the key. That word.
Yeah.
Open source.
Sorry, I'm just gonna. Hi everyone, I'm back. I'm just gonna say that if I keep dropping, Samson will lead the conversation. I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi, so that's okay. But I got that last part from Aniedi, so that's great. But we can continue.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Next, you're next. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Sultan. The called. I don't know. Did I say source, which is web monetization in Africa? So it's a really broad system. It's a really broad structure and architecture. But yeah, I'm really excited about this and about open source in Africa and open source in the old era. I think I'll call myself an open source guy. I mean, I started coming into open source about just 3 years ago now. So I'm still coming up in open source. So don't see me as an expert in open source or so. So Samson is my boss in open source. So I say that's different.
No. I'm still as new as you are. So I don't think I'm expert or anything else. So Frank, do you care to go next?
So my name is Frank Tamre. I am an. So it's probably.
Oops,
Oh, I think we lost Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
This is so not cool. Yeah. I think let's switch to Daniel.
Let's losing people anyhow.
2020, peak 2020.
I think
There he is.
Okay, Frank. Yeah, you can continue. Yeah, we can hear you now. Can you hear me? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Frank, go ahead. Can you hear me? Hello, Frank?
I don't think he can hear you.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, Daniel.
He's dropped again.
Yeah, I'll go
Okay,
ahead.
Daniel,
I'm Daniel. I do developer relations at Strappy, one of the fastest growing open source projects currently. And yeah, open source, I've been in open source for a couple of years, mostly as a contributor, and super exciting to be on the panel.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah. DVD Drip, Edidiong, do you want to introduce yourself? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Okay. So my name is Edidiong Asikpo. I work as a software engineer in the developer relations team at InterSwitch. I have been contributing to open source for about 3 to 4 years. I'm not sure, like in between, and it's been really great to be a contributor and just like support and advocate for open source in Africa. And I'm super excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Oh, Frank, you just joined. Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Frank, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Awesome.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, do you want
about that? I don't know what happened.
Yeah, the internet is crazy. Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. So my name is Frank Tamre. I am an Android developer. Let me just say mobile because right now I'm using Flutter as ecosystem, and currently I do stuff with Snap Mobile. That is. But over and above that, I think I've been involved in the Android space, and Android is just another whole world of open source that you're looking at. from 2012. Oh my God, it's been 8 years. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing, and yeah, just playing around and just like having fun with the whole open source. But I think over and above that, I think Samson, I organized the open source chapter of OSCA in Nairobi, for that matter. So
Also, yeah, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so so I think that's everybody, and I don't think Marlene is here, so we'll just go ahead. So yeah, so this is a very important conversation because I believe I believe everybody here at some point have come across the word open source, or some newbies might have asked like, what is the word open source? And I believe like most of the people in this section here are just curious on like, what are the ways to contribute to open source? So myself and Marlene, we came up with I believe, an interesting question. So we try not to. Don't worry, we're not going to ask any serious questions. We try possible, but I will encourage everybody to keep it under a minute. So to make it much easier for everybody to answer, so we could wrap up as much as possible. So yeah. So the first question. Hello, Marlene. Marlene, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. I'm hoping.
Awesome.
I'm hoping I'm back. I'm sorry, I've just been coming in and out, but let's continue. So you can go ahead with
the first question. Oh, do you want me to go ahead with first? Okay, awesome. Because I wanted to like ladies first, so.
Oh, sure. I think you can go ahead, and then I'll ask the next question.
Oh, great. So the first question here on my list is, why should people be interested in contributing to open source, and what are the benefits? So this is an open question. You could raise your hand if you want to answer. Did you get the question?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So open source. Why should people contribute to open source? I think open source is. I like to think about the benefits and why the world needs the benefits open source brings. Just having the freedom to not be tied into a certain provider and being able to contribute and have like community build something that they actually want is something that's truly beneficial. And open source has values that I think the world needs to mirror, like openness, accountability. And contributing into open source for me is getting into those values and bringing them into the world around you. And software particularly, I think, is something that needs a lot of those values. So that's the benefit of doing open source. I mean, besides like the societal benefits I just mentioned, into open source as like it does so many things, and career-wise, growth, learning opportunities, networking, reach. There's just so many aspects that open source brings to you as a person, and getting into it really is it's a win-win thing, in my opinion.
Awesome. Anybody else with a different idea around that question?
So Samson.
Okay, Aniedi, I see you.
I think one of the benefits of open source is sort of fueling and eventually quenching your curiosity. You know, it's like if you owned a car and then you were driving a car all day long and you never even like popped up the hood to see what's in there, what's making the car drive, where do you put water, where do you put oil, and then at some point, even when you start doing that, when you want to go a little bit further, you might even want to go out, open some of that thing, maybe the engine of the device. So if you're the curious kind of person, and just like Daniel said, that is kind of like the culture or the personality or the kind of people we need on this continent. I think open source is one area where when you delve into IT and then you delve into software, you can actually quench that curiosity.
Yeah, that's really amazing, because the fact is, because it's more like I think this Marlene is not here. Okay. Because this kind of like goes into my Marlene, can you hear me? You keep dropping, so I just wanted to be sure.
I'm not sure she can hear you. I think her network is still bad.
Okay. Well, okay.
Now you're sure.
Go ahead.
Now you're sure.
Yeah. So we have like 1 more minute on this topic. Anybody else care to comment?
Yeah, let me add
Why should people
something
be
to
Yeah,
that.
interested?
yes, Samson.
Okay, fine, go ahead.
Okay, Edidiong first,
Okay,
then
okay.
Frank. Yeah.
All right, so just to speak to
Didi,
basically adding
please
to
go
what
ahead. Didi.
Daniel said, and I'll just like take one point from what he
Mhm.
said, being that open source gives you an opportunity to be able to contribute to get like a real life experience. So most times when you graduate from school, you don't like get a job like easily, right? Because people want to see that you have prior experience, maybe working in like another company before joining their company, right? People don't really want to hire people that don't have prior experience working on anything. I think open source gives you that opportunity to be able to contribute. Like using myself as an instance, I basically got my job because I was able to contribute to open source and talk about those things I was able to do, right? So if I did open source, I'll probably not have experience with working with like a company or an organization. So that's one important thing that I think open source gives to people, an opportunity to be able to like get like job opportunities or get connected to people via contributing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. So Frank, do you want to add to
So,
that?
yeah, yes. So let me look at it from the point of view of as a developer. That is, if you're a junior developer, something that Aniedi said about the whole curiosity bit. I look at it from the other point of even your skills are usually expanded, because when you look at a code base, like I remember my first interaction with the Android core, like the platform code base. When I was looking at it and I was like, okay, cool. What if I added this? I removed this, and you get to learn different ways in which more experienced people are actually releasing some stuff. And I think getting that tweaking, you start off first of all by like editing one or two things, and the next thing now okay, if I want to do a specific thing, if I want to do a login, this is I've learned from different people. I think I don't know if it was Einstein who said that you sort of like you've been able to go more by standing on the shoulders of giants or other men. So that's what you do with the whole platform, like when you get in touch with like open source and like start meddling your hands with open source. And so it does all this whole career benefit, and also it improves you as a person in terms of your skills for that matter.
Yeah, actually, thanks for bringing that part of the conversation, because that comes to the second question to you, Frank. So, like, as a software engineer yourself, like, how do you think being part of the open source community helps you personally or career-wise?
So like one of the things is I love the way so you see, like once you start contributing towards to open source, you get to interact with very opinionated people. And I think sometimes writing your code and learning to deal with opinionated people is really good, because you will do something and you think that's the best version of your work, and then someone will ask you, why did you do it like that? And then they really correct you from, like, let's say if you've written 20 lines of code, they reduce it like 10 or 5, and they show you a better way of doing things. I think so. Number one is you also start to learn best practices, because I think every open source project has this code of conduct. So you start learning, how do I work with a whole global or a whole diverse set of people? How do I contribute in a meaningful way? The other thing that I think is also very important to note is, as a software engineer, I think you being at the forefront of contributing to something that means more to the whole world, that helps the whole world, where there's no direct monetary benefit. I think it does something to you in that you get to stretch yourself, because now you're asking yourself, why am I doing this? And the pay is not there in the front. And so you have to give the best version of yourself, because someone else is going to actually get to stretch yourself.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, because it's sort of, which goes down to my next question. I don't know if Marlene is still here, but I can see her. Um, you know, Speaking about, because we can't really talk about open source in Africa if we don't really discuss about like the challenges and the obstacles, right? So this is a general question, but I would love Sultan to comment on this. So the question goes this way: what are the obstacles that Africans face when it comes to contributing to open source? So it could be your own personal experience, it could be somebody that you mentor, it could be your program, in this case, like Dev Career. Because I know for the fact that one of the things could be internet, it could be laptops, it could be, just basically looking for ways to have, one-to-one mentorship. So what's your idea around, what you think is the problem that makes the continent Africa a little bit away from open source?
Okay, well, I think there are quite a lot of challenges, but I would not even want to go into the one with. I would want to start from time zone actually. Now we have to be frank. A lot of open source projects actually generate from the US. Those are from the like majorly from the US. So a lot of these developers are from the US, and a lot of these projects are actually started by developers from the US. So the time frame, the time zone is one of the issues because when you see, for instance, if there's a call to contribute right now to open source, and you are here in Nigeria having 6 hours different, I'm telling you that by the time you say, okay, let me contribute tomorrow morning, maybe you've seen something simple that you feel, oh, this is quite easy for me to quickly contribute to. You understand? And by tomorrow, that is fixed already because, I mean, there are people working with that particular time zone. So that's not like the major issue. Another thing I've noticed was there was the time I wanted to contribute to a product. So it was a product, it was a whole company. I wanted to work with the company as a developer then, about a year ago or so. And I went to their repo. I mean, one of the easy ways to actually get companies to actually like you is you could just show them what you can do first. They will not actually reach out to you. So I went there, I was like, okay. And a lot of the issues I was seeing there was I saw issues on Fortran. I saw a lot of issues with programming languages that are not what I'm even used to. And these are like let's say legacy languages called Java. Like, wait, what? When did you even start writing Java here? Like, so stuff like that is a lot of these barriers. I know we are aware of some of the barriers already. These are the internet, but the barriers that is out there, but we're not actually even putting notice on are these simple things: languages, time zone, the programming language, legacy codes itself that does not actually allow beginners to actually try and dive into it because you know definitely that you don't even understand the code itself, even with all the comments and documentation.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason. But I'm happy now that a lot of codes have been written, a lot of documentations have been updated to actually allow people who just coming into programming to actually be able to contribute to these particular packages, to contribute to this particular language, and which is really cool actually. So I'll still talk more along the way on that particular part. I think.
Yeah. So Edidiong, are you there? All right. I don't think she can hear me.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I don't think she can.
Edidiong, can you hear?
Yeah. So I'll move the spotlight to Aniedi. So Aniedi, again, you've been, one of the, should I say, one of the, in Nigeria, we like using the word organ at the top. When it comes to the forefront, when it comes to the forefront of,
I think I should wear a face mask like Sultan.
Yeah. So when it comes to like the forefront of communities and open source, so what in your day-to-day, not particularly to your job though, like in your day-to-day activities, going hosting events and talking to people and having some kind of mentorship. What's your opinion on how do you see these obstacles? Or have you tried to? Or what are those obstacles that you think that kind of make Africans, or in this case Nigeria in this case, stay away from open source because they keep saying, oh, I want to contribute to open source, but for some reason they just do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very impressed by the direction which Sultan sort of addressed this question, which is the obvious things like infrastructure. We don't need to belabor those ones. Like those ones are there and they will continue being problems. But I think one other thing that is a big problem is culture, and it's a culture of being wrong or possibly being wrong, and also a culture of feedback. So sometimes people don't want to show what they do or let another person review their work, sort of like openly. So you don't want to submit maybe a patch, or you don't want to respond to an issue because the feedback that would be given on that issue might even just be public as well. So I think this is one area where we can do more, we can do better. And generally, with events and even with communities, you notice that people's attitude changes over time. So first of all, they want to attend meetups, or they don't want to attend meetups. Then they want to contribute. Then they want to lead. And then they want to even go ahead and create new communities when they see the benefit.
I think I lost you a little. I don't know. Yeah, my.
Yeah, I think he dropped off.
Oh.
But I was
So the aspect of wanting to always be right.
Yeah, go ahead, Aniedi. Yeah, you froze. Oh, I think it's still. Okay.
I totally understand what Aniedi is saying, and I think that's a really, really big point. I think what he's trying to say is, I'm trying to fill in for my boss till he comes back. Though. So the one thing is, we as humans, we take feedback very serious when it comes to business, when it comes to personal growth, and you don't want to feel belittled by somebody telling you that, oh, this part you updated, this particular fix you did. This is something I would have done 15 years ago. This is 2020. You don't try codes like this. It will really deflect your morale a lot. And a lot of people feel I'm comfortable at a particular stage where I am. It's not as if there's a rope on my neck to contribute to open source. So I don't need to put myself out there. So it's like the fear of the unknown. I think that's what Aniedi is trying to point out. The fear of the unknown kind of makes people like, I have nothing to lose. So since it's just like that. And another thing I think again is the companies also. I mean, okay, quick one. Samson mentioned two companies in Nigeria actually that actually has a product that's open source.
Oh, that's a strong spotlight you're putting me right now. So I
yes, company in Africa that has products. You have 3 seconds. One company. I think
that's a hard one. That's a hard one.
There's a Kenyan company, Ushahidi, I think. I'm not sure if that's how
Ushahidi.
Even Daniel is saying he's not sure.
No, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I think it's
Ushahidi. You Daniel, you pronounce it right.
Can you hear?
Didi, maybe your
mic.
I guess Didi, just connect check the cable whether it's fully started inside.
Let me speak to sign language. Didi, Mike.
Check on mute.
On culture.
Didi, I think you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Didi,
we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Didi.
Yeah.
Okay. I think So I think let's so Daniel, this question is for you, right? This was a question from Marlene. She said, in Zambia,
yes,
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm saying, right, Daniel.
Yeah.
So this is a question from Marlene. So she said, particularly in Zambia, what are the challenges that developers face in this case when it comes to contributing to open source, particularly in Zambia?
I think it's also more of a culture problem, and so I think we've grown as a lot of Africa, like open source. I like to think of it as a what's the word? As a philosophy, and
I think while we wait for Daniel, I don't know if Daniel is online or I'm talking over anyone. I hope I'm not talking over anyone.
He's saying, Daniel is.
Daniel.
Yeah, I don't think the platform enables everybody to speak. But Daniel, Daniel.
All right, great.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so like,
okay,
us becoming who we are and embracing the culture of open source. Like open source can be applied to a lot of different areas. So open source is like a philosophy, open source journalism, open source technology. Technology, when you're trying to apply open source to technology, the issues that we have in general when you talk about infrastructure come up. But then applying those like the values and actually getting to work on open source, I like to think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So before you can think of something like open source, so that, like this hierarchy basically is before you can do anything, you talk about your safety, you try and get like your loved ones fed and your security, and then you can start doing things that can help you be a better person. So in Zambia specifically, open source is like doing things to make you a better person and grow in your career. And if that's not something that can cater for the things below you, give you money, give you food, like, put food on your table, then people won't do that. And that's a huge problem. It just isn't like a viable it isn't on people's minds. So people have got other things to worry about, and that's a huge reason why they aren't contributing to open source software.
That's a very strong one.
Samson, can I say
So I think
yeah, so I think that's a really amazing point, Daniel, and I think even it does not only apply to Zanga, it applies to Nigeria and tons of other. Even this applies to individuals in general all over the world. You feel, I mean, you have a certain set of reward and a certain set of responsibilities that you actually have to pick up. So you don't spend your time contributing to open source. And I think over the past few months, Marlene and I, and even Daniel himself here, we've been working on something called Afrifi. So Afrifi is an organization that this problem of open source contribution from that particular part, a way where you can contribute to open source and get revenue, get credits, get something back in return for contributing to open source. So it's going to help your career as an individual. It's going to help your environment. It's going to help your content. It's going to help you scale in terms of financial returns also. So I think more on that will still come up soon, but I totally dig that point.
Yeah, you see, I've been very silently tweeting to myself about one of these companies, be it like Udo-Africa in Zambia, Paystack or Flutterwave. They really need to work with like GitHub sponsors to get African open source developers to be compensated for their work.
I think that's a good one. Yeah.
I think that's something that needs to happen, because if people can be paid for their contributions, then I think we would have more people doing open source in Africa.
I don't know who is here from GitHub, but GitHub, if anybody here watching us, please integrate GitHub sponsors to some African payment like Flutterwave, Paystack, and rest. We need people to get paid. We need people to get paid.
Yes.
So this goes on to my next question. So Aniedi mentioned about culture, which is very important. Myself, the way I got into open source was basically because I tried to neglect some cultures just to get into open source, particularly due to the onboarding process. So this question goes to Didi. Recently I started helping the Edidiong project, which the DevOps interface when it comes to the Linux desktops, particularly to work on their onboarding process, right? So I don't know how I want to phrase this question. Maybe it should be something personal to you, or maybe how you got into open source. But the question is on what are those challenges you faced when it comes to onboarding, maybe down to yourself, and having to think that do you think having much better onboarding process from an organization point of view or from an organization perspective could better get more Africans to join an open source project? Again, you have experience when it comes to Season of Dog and DLC, so do you want to talk more on having much better onboarding process?
Yeah, I think it's really important for open source organizations to have good onboarding process, because it definitely improves the number of contributions they get, right? So imagine going to an open source organization where they don't break down issues, they don't tell you if this issue is for beginners or if it's for intermediates or for experts, and then you just jump on any issue that would most likely be for an expert and you're a beginner. You would definitely give a point that say, okay, hey, no, I'm not doing this, it's not for me. But when an open source organization has a good onboarding process, meaning when you join, you know where to go to, you can clearly see that, oh, hey, this is the GitHub repository. And when you get to the GitHub repository, you can see that each issue is actually labeled, right? So they have issues for beginners, issues I think they call it good first bug, beginner friendly. They have certain tags that make you identify this particular issue, right? So you can easily come to the issue and respond. And I think also having a good managers or maintainers in the project. Some open source organizations don't even have forums, and even if they have those forums, they are not active there. So it's hard to go to an open source organization and people don't respond to you. Kind of makes you want to probably go to another one. So if open source organizations have good onboarding process for newbies, for experts, let them know that they can easily reach out to someone, know who to reach out to. Some email addresses, you send an email address to someone and nobody responds for over a month. So that means nobody's actually looking at that email address, but added to the website or something, right? So if no doubt there are still open source organizations that are doing really, really great in terms of onboarding newbies. They are really amazing organizations, but then there are also some of them that are not doing like the best thing. And imagine if a beginner goes there for the first time, he or she would most likely not want to delve into open source anymore.
Interesting. So I think so far we've talked about culture, we've talked about onboarding, we've talked about payments, compensation, or how to pay open source developers. Because again, this was something I talked about at the GitHub universe when I had the opportunity to discuss, open source in Africa. Because one of the things that I have seen, one of the things I've seen in the continent is due to the fact that we are much younger when it comes to age range compared to that of the States, Europe, or Asia. So that means it's almost very difficult to see somebody in the tech space with a straight 10 years experience, 11 years experience, or probably just easily get a job at Google, all those companies that could hire you to work on open source, right? So this kind of comes down to my next question. So this is a broad question. To answer, just raise your hand and I'll point you, then you can answer. So the question goes this way: what are the responsibilities for companies to support open source communities and developers in the continent? What do you think companies should be doing better? Because I believe everybody here works or are affiliated in some organization, right? So what do you think is the better way for companies to help the ecosystem in terms of open source? So I see Sultan first. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Sultan, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So, so I would start with a very short example. Number one is let's say for instance we have two payments. For instance, we have two payments payments API platform. For instance, one is easily used, and the other one gives a lot of problem to use. Now, what the other one would do that would probably would be I wanted to bring the points about what API I did right back in the days, but I think that's gonna be later. So what I'm saying is a community. Actually, that's like the simple answer. It creates a community. Now, so I saw something on Twitter today. The current maintainer for Babel said that he wants to make a few updates and is asking XWYX. You know him, right? I can't remember his name, but I think that's his name is XWYX. So he asked, yeah, exactly.
Sean,
He asked him and another, exactly, Sean. So he asked him and somebody else to join him. They created a Discord, a Discord channel, and asked people that are interested in contributing to join that Discord channel so they can talk more on how to contribute. Now that's a community. That's how you actually create a community. Now, if even 20 people just join, that's cool. You get to interact more. I think you feel more connected to a project when you know people that are actually handling that particular project. Take for instance, if Flutter should open an open source project now and decide that we're going to be using Discord or Slack for the community for this project, people would join, interact with developers from Flutterwave, and be like, "Oh, I'm having this issue with your payment system, but I fixed this. This was how I was able to make it easier. How about you guys start using something like this?" Things like that, you feel more connected to that particular system. And before you know, you see that nobody will complain about Flutterwave's API any longer or social. So I'm just an example. I'm not passionately complaining. I'm just saying the answer is community. If you are able to create a community around the products, even if it's open source, even if it's not open, you actually carry people along.
Okay.
And that's
Let me piggyback on that.
Aniedi can go here.
Just in a broader sense. So I think what you're saying is like companies want, first of all, they need to show some sort of commitment to open source, right? So whether it's having one open source or one community evangelist or something, and then bigger all the way to have things like an open source programs office, an open source organization, or department. The other thing is sort of encouraging your developers to actually contribute to open source and to sort of create some of their work in a very open fashion. So you should be able to identify what you can share, what you can't share, and create sort of like an environment.
Is it just me or do we
contribute and share?
Yeah,
And then I think finally, I hope I'm not breaking up.
Actually has some kind of issue. You can't hear everyone.
Oh, yeah. Okay, can you hear Aniedi?
Yes, I can hear.
Aniedi.
Okay. So just to round up, and then finally, I think one thing that companies have to do with an open source culture is succeed, right? We've talked about payment, we've talked about money, but if you're this fancy open source company and you are not out there, really looking very successful or being very successful, then there isn't an appetite for an open source culture. If you look at some of the very big companies, and I use this as a general example, that you have companies that are driven their business with proprietary and closed software, and then you have companies that are doing their business with open software, and both have also ended up being $1 trillion or million or billion dollar companies. When people see that kind of success, then they are encouraged to go in one direction. So if a company doesn't exhibit some sort of open culture and doesn't succeed with that sort of open culture, there's no way you can convince a lot of other companies to be open. And I think when Aisha said so in the comments, it's very clear that some of our indigenous companies have built very successful businesses in a very closed fashion, and it would really take someone building a business in a rather open fashion and also leveling up and succeeding at that level for people to really believe that being open is the way to go, or it's one way to go.
Yeah, Aniedi, I want to say something. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
So I can't see
what Aniedi said now is just sparked the point in my mind. Now the thing is, we are aware that a lot of companies are out there that they built their own platform on open source programs, open source libraries, open source stuff, and they are letting you know that our whole organization is built on open source, and because of that, we are giving back to open source. They're making it public. But the issue I think we're having is that we built their product on open source softwares, open source products, but they're not public. They are successful, but they're not putting it out there for you. We run on open source software. But they are successful using open source software, but they are not putting it in your face. So people are not actually aware that this company is using open source software, they're using open source API, they're using open source libraries and code. But this is what they are using, but they are not publicizing it, and they are really successful. So I think what we should be encouraging now is, if you are a company using an open source software to actually scale your business, let people know that this is what you are using and appreciate it by starting your own open source software, or even making people know that this is open source we are using. I mean, just let people know that this is what you're using. Don't hide it as if you built your own framework yourself or so.
Exactly.
I think that would end up don't hide it.
Yeah, I think I lost. For some reason, the platform keeps switching audio. It seems like there's a if and else statement running the platform. Yeah.
So let me add on what let me add to what Sultan said. Yeah. So I think that there's some companies who are the way the whole conversation on should we make this open, should we make this more closed, should we put it out there? I think one of the fears that probably we have, and you see this in our educational system all over the continent, is that we are not taught to share or group work. What we are actually told most of the time is, hey, the best thing that you can do for yourself is you have to hide your work. You have to hide the things that you're doing. You have to focus on your thing. And so because it starts from that educational culture where everyone is being told, hey, prevent, don't share. It's not a culture that we have. That when kids are going to school, it's like my thing, that whole element of my thing needs to first of all stop. Because these are the people who are going to create these companies out there. And once they create the companies, the culture starts to trickle down. And so when you write your piece of code, these companies, you'll find that someone is afraid of sharing, and they have different examples of payment APIs, for instance, even in the country where I'm in. Again, I'm not going to mention any names, but there are good examples where they have a version that doesn't work, but then the developer community has built something that works really well. But then instead of them even adopting it or eating the humble pie and adopting it, what they do is they'll try and prevent that version that works from even working in the overall scale.
So true.
I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, so we have can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we have we're almost running out of time. So I'll just ask two more questions. So one is going to be to Aniedi, and then one general question. So Aniedi, I know you were talking about companies adopting. Before I lost your audio, you were talking about having some kind of a open source program office in companies, which I think is a very great idea. It's something that have worked in most of this Western world, like the US, in this case, like your company. The Open Source Festival was it's something that kind of, in my opinion, kind of, I don't want to say kickstarts, but enhances the passion in some way, because people had the opportunity to, for some reason, to connect. And then we use a particular statement. I don't know how you see the statement, but it's something I want to ask. So, as regards to the next video creators, what is your advice? What is your advice when it comes to hiring African talents? Because most of the time, I know we've asked this question before, but I wanted you to maybe have a little bit of touch in it. They keep encouraging Africans to contribute to open source, but for some reason, it's almost impossible to hire Africans, right? So, which is something that I'm not really sure why is that is a problem. But what's your opinion when it comes to companies hiring?
So I'll be very brief about this. I think there are other people that can answer this question a little bit better than I can. Companies just have to do the work and they have to invest in it. Sometimes when you...
Can any other person hear him?
Yeah, I can hear Aniedi.
Yeah, I can
hear you.
Okay.
So I think some companies just have to do the work, and they have to make a very conscious investment to bring in what you would say are these very experienced developers. Like when people start leveling up with open source, they become international talent, right? And they could work for anybody, and they have, like Daniel said it very much at the beginning, the opportunity, the networking and everything is just so broad. And at that point, you have to value that developer, and you also have to value the culture that sort of developer can bring to your team. And then when you see opportunities like the Open Source Festival, whether it's a local, regional, or international thing, you need to get involved. And you also need to create some kind of willingness to understand what this space is about and why you should invest in this space. So I think it's about people, companies, whoever's leading companies, making that upfront investment, better understanding the space, the reason why, and adopting that sort of culture. And like many other things we've done in our career with communities and everything, you need to learn. So you sort of, like, I think Frank said it very well, you just have to be humble and then go to the people, the places, the organizations where these things have been done, learn how to do them, perfect them, and then contribute to the community. I think that's the way you grow your company and your talent pool.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so so since we have, I think we're almost out of time. But so this is a broad question.
Sorry.
Welcome back.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Welcome back.
Hey.
The internet decided to just go crazy and just I don't know what happened. But thank you. The discussion has been so great from what I've picked up. I did want to give a little bit of time to answer a couple of questions from the comments. I saw a couple of people were asking, so that we have some input as well. So did anyone want to reiterate a comment, a question? I know that David has just said, is there a feeling that the massive increase in remote working caused by the ongoing pandemic is going to make it easier to get hired? Has anyone applied for a remote position recently? And I think hiring is such a key part of the conversation. I think, Aniedi, you touched on that briefly in terms of, if people are going to be giving to companies by contributing to open source, are those companies providing value as well to the community by hiring them right back? And so do you think that, in this season, are there going to be more hires because of the remote work that has come with the pandemic? So does anyone have any answers to that? Yeah.
I would love to
answer yes, and then I'll hand over to anybody else.
Yes. Okay. We hope so, and then we actually hope Google is leading the pack. Okay.
Yeah, Aniedi can go ahead.
It's just a yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think I mentioned I work at Strappy, and it's an open source company. I was an open source contributor before, and I got hired remotely, and I think that's something we've done. We just shared a blog post about one of our most active community members, Derek, who's been a very active contributor for 3 years, and we've hired him remotely. So I think everything going on really is accelerating and helping fuel remote hiring. So there's definitely a lot more opportunities open to people around the world.
Exactly.
And open source is a really good entry.
Yeah.
And something that can help with that.
Exactly. Congratulations. I know you just got hired, which is exciting. I know, Sultan, you also just recently joined a company that you're working with remotely. Do you want to talk about that a little bit as well?
What we do at Gone for the like a dev or the developer relations manager at Gone for the Web, something like that. And I'm also an ambassador at Gone for the Web. And what we do is we work on web monetization. We're just like the body Mozilla and Creative Commons. So the team I'm working with right now is the team for Mozilla, Coil, and Creative Commons. And my own particular job is to support the adoption of web monetization in Africa. Saying something the other time that for companies that want to go into so they have to be intentional about it. This is exactly what intentional means. I mean, I'm in Africa, I'm not in Africa, I work in Africa, and that's why I'm focusing on the African part. I mean, some other companies could have just said, oh, let's just get somebody and say the person is handling Africa. So, I mean, you're not in Africa, you don't know what the challenges people here are facing, you don't know what the content creators in Africa are facing. So, the best person for the role would be somebody that actually relates to the African ecosystem. So, that's been intentional, and this is, I work with an amazing team, and we have a lot of plans coming up for content creators. Now, in terms of content creators, we developers are like, we are at the middle of everything because we are consumers and we are creators also. I mean, we write articles, that means we are creators, and we also consume articles, we consume tutorial videos and podcasts, that means we are also users also. So my work right now is to make sure that you get paid for actually creating content here. And the word open source in my work is the fact that web monetization is very interesting. I've written kind of
I don't know if it's just me. Did Sultan just freeze?
Yeah, I think he dropped.
Okay. Oh, Africa. This is the reason why they are not hiring us. This is exactly the reason.
I know, network has just been really terrible.
I know.
No, I think the issues are universal, to be honest. It's really just exacerbated on the continent because,
Yeah.
I know, so David had a question. He said, how are people taught what open source projects are best to use to solve specific problems? So we know that open source technology is usually the best technology to use, but which ones are the correct ones to use? Does anyone have an answer to that? Like in terms of as we consume open source software. Yes, Frank.
I was going to trade that, Frank.
Yeah, so let me touch on that. So I think the good. Let me give a good example from something that is more homegrown, and that will be Ushahidi, because it was mentioned.
Okay.
So there was different. So Ushahidi it helps with disaster management, just in very few words. It helps with disaster management, and so you will see initially when it started off, there are all these contributions, and so the best way I think as a metrics for me is when you look at the number of people who are contributing to the project itself. That's usually number one. Number two is, do they have, like with these open source projects, do they have use cases? And I draw this example from me who is in software, is any new software that's released out there, they will have something to do with a showcase or where it's being applied. One of the times is if you don't see a use case there, if you look at those use cases there, or if you approach those companies or various kind of solutions that have been built based on that open source technology, and you ask them this question, it's usually easy for them to give you like direct replies. And I can give an example of right now, even at my place of work, we have these technologies that we're using. So sometimes we have to sort of like stretch the boundaries of our imagination just to build software and code. And so we have, sometimes it forces you to actually reach out to a certain organization and ask them, hey, I've seen you're using this, or a developer, hey, I've seen you're using this. What's your experience with using it? And the beauty is, if they're using something that is open source, they actually give you feedback. They don't take it as this is something proprietary, so I'm going to die with it. No. And so for me, it's like I look at the use cases, and I think I've seen most people look at that use case and they say, hey, let's adopt this. And it's so fascinating how that solution that has been developed here in Africa is being used globally to do different instances of even disaster management. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. That's a great answer. I don't know, Didi, I know that you also contribute quite a bit as well to open source. And for you, what makes you drawn to a project to contribute on your end? Like, why did you choose the projects that you chose?
Yeah, so for me, it's the community really. So if I try to, 'cause at some point, I try to like join different open source organizations and try to see how active they are in their forums, because I think that is really important, because you may you respond to like 1 week. I understand that people are busy, so maybe a few days is fine, and I'm also really patient. So I know that most of these open source maintainers are actually volunteers as well, but we also need people to be able to like respond to our questions as soon as they can, maybe like in a span of 1 week, which is not probably terrible. So those are the things I actually look out for. Okay, hey, is this open source organization cool? The people there, are just supportive, because most times when you're contributing to open source, a lot of things may not really make sense immediately. So you need to ask questions. So are they willing to answer your questions? How are they answering those questions? They're answering it in like a rude way, trying to make you feel dumb, more dumb than you thought you were, or are they doing it in like a really cool way as well? I also look out to that as well. So I think overall, those are like the two most important things I look out for. And again, sometimes I contribute to open source projects that I probably used once or twice, or maybe I've heard a lot about the project, and I just find it really interesting at what they're actually doing. So let's say VLC, for instance, I've been using the app like since when I was like in secondary school. So like being able to like contribute to it is exciting, because I know that I have I've benefited from this open source organization in one way or the other. So it's also kind of the process of maybe giving back as well. Like, okay, hey, you did this for me. You're doing this for free for like so many people. So let me also like help you as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. I know that Aniedi wants to respond to Michael. I don't know what Michael said, or what do you want to respond to?
Yeah, so I think Michael was referencing Vuisile, and it was like an argument can be made that contributing to open source is to free unpaid labor and three for people with privilege. Everything is hard for beginners, to be honest. It has to be made easy for beginners. If you wanted to jump into Android development or machine learning or even just basic CSS, I try to read these articles on CSS and I always get lost. I just close them and then go to the next article. So a conscious effort has to be made to make it easy for beginners, and I think a lot of people do a lot of stuff to make sure you can make your first contribution and try to encourage you to say, even if it's just documentation, it's great. And then when you have programs like maybe System of Docs or Summer of Code or any of the programs, there's usually an entry level for beginners. So I don't think there's anything that is really extremely easy for beginners. Free unpaid labor and people with privileged time and money. I think Samson, you've got a lot of work to do in sort of helping educate and give people a lot more information about the culture, because I think the culture of entitlement and instant gratification are two things I've been spending a lot of my time trying to get developers to understand that nothing comes easy. You know, we hear all these ones of it takes 20 years to become an overnight success. So it's not very different in open source. I think there's just a lot of orientation that needs to be done. And then forums like this, where people who have experience with the ecosystem and the community, or just the discipline, can come back and tell you that it all looks nice and rosy right now, but 5 years ago when I started, 7 years ago when I started, this is the only route. So it may look hard for beginners, it may look like free unpaid labor, but if you can take away entitlement and the need for instant gratification, you can eventually get the benefits from open source and the open source community.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Samson, I just want to first say thank you to Samson for literally carrying this session on his back while I was away. And I do think it is actually time for us to close the session, because we have some talks that are going to be going on. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really great, and from what I caught, it was great. If you have questions for any of the panelists, all of us are on Twitter. PyCon Africa has been tweeting. You'll find a thread with all of the panelists' handles, so you can feel free to reach out to any of us and ask questions if you have any questions, or even in the people tab, if you have direct questions for each of us, feel free to message us and we'll get back to you. But thank you so much for joining us, and that's the end of it. Bye.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.